475th Contact Wednesday, the 26th of November 2008, 1416 HRS.
And there you are already. The two of us arriving at the same moment. As soon as you called me, I immediately rushed away. Heartily welcome, and my greetings at your arrival, Ptah, dear friend. I am glad that you are coming today and that you are hale and hearty. Just 2.5 months have passed since your last visit. Since then, a lot has happened on our good Mother Earth, especially with regard to the predictions you made on the 16th of September. The worldwide crash of the banks, the economic difficulties, and the recession have expanded enormously, as have the economic problems and the unemployment as a result of large-scale layoffs, just as you had announced it. But let me repeat, I am extremely pleased that you are here again. Well, sometimes time hangs heavy on my hands. Have you already been back from your holidays for a long time?
Me too, I extend my greetings to you, and of course I am also happy to see you well, my dear friend. I am supposed to send you greetings from my daughters, Simyase and Pleja, but also from Askit, Ikarina, and from all the others you know personally. But also our spiritual leadership and many others who are unknown to you send you greetings. And as for the predictions regarding the crash of the banks, you should not just talk about what I had said, because you yourself predicted the whole debacle already 50 years ago and distributed it to governments, newspapers, and radio stations. Already at that time, nobody wanted to hear the truth, something that has persisted this way to this day, which is also the reason why you are attacked again and again, which will unfortunately also be the case next January, because you have defended yourself and publicly written the truth.
My dearest thanks to all of them for the greetings, if you would please convey this from me. And the predictions, well, that happened already a long time ago. But regarding the fact that I will be attacked again, I guess one can only wait and see what will come. Therefore, I also do not want to know anything more specific.
That's not a problem, and your wish is my duty.
Thanks again. But my question, have you already been back from your holidays for a long time?
I have already been back for 10 days, however. During that time, I had to take care of various important things. Also, regarding foresight concerning unusual events on the Earth, I have made an effort, but about this I will report to you later.
That's also good, because that way I can ask you something regarding the translation work for the Goblet of the Truth. What is your opinion concerning us seeking personal contact with the person who translates in order to correspond directly with that person regarding the translation work? It might make some things easier for us.
The idea is not a good one, because if you were seeking direct contact with the person who translates, it would in any case only have to be a one-time event that would solely be allowed to serve for information and clarifications. Some other personal contact would correspond to a missionary activity and would be detrimental to the entire work, because the person would be influenced in his or her neutral behavior and would tend towards his or her own interpretation of the contents of the book. Exactly this must be avoided, however, by having the translation take place without influence. And the person is proficient enough in the two languages, German and English, to translate the whole content in the right way with a few specific exceptions, as I found out in a corresponding clarification 3 days ago. The fact that mistakes of words occur in the conversion of certain terms is probably understandable, because certain words require a more precise interpretation according to the spiritual teaching, as do certain sentence meanings. Consequently, respective correction work is necessary from you, for which I have asked you to, on my behalf, request Marianne and Willem to do this work. And as I know they are both making great efforts to exercise the necessary control over the translations, and also to carry out the necessary corrections. As a matter of fact, the translator person cannot be expected as a layman with regard to the spiritual teaching and the teaching of the prophets to know all the words and terms that occur and to be able to always correctly interpret and convert the content of the sentence. This in particular also because English is a very poor language, so that the German language used in the Goblet of the Truth can never be translated in its full value, but only in giving the general sense. In order to understand comprehensively in its entire value the Goblet of the Truth, as well as all other teaching books and writings concerning the spiritual teaching, it is absolutely necessary to be proficient in the German language. And since the English language, like all other earthly languages, is inadequate, there is a particular need to find the right terms for certain words, in order to be able to correct the entire matter to some extent in accordance with its general sense.
However, when doing so, it cannot be that I too am not involved, because on the one hand, the right terms are not easy to find, and on the other hand, there are also factors with regard to the interpretation of sentences. Hence, these must be turned in the right direction, and the right forms and terms must be found. But I already told you this on your last visit. It otherwise simply is not practicable.
I thought about your explanation and found that you were probably right.
Evidently. But let me ask you a question that was addressed to me about the beverage beer, which is drunk in large quantities, especially by the human beings in the industrialized countries of our world. Do you also know this brew? Many human beings on the earth are beer drinkers, namely men as well as women, but especially also young persons, who get drunk with beer as well as other alcoholic beverages up to the point of loss of consciousness and organized drinking orgies.
I am oriented about that. But in our place no beer is brewed and therefore also no beer is drunk. Concerning this beverage, it also has to be said that it is very detrimental to health if more than 1 deciliter of it is drunk per day, because it contains toxic substances which damage both the liver, the heart, and the remaining organs, as well as the cell tissue. In addition to this, the toxins also have a destructive effect on the brain, thereby also damaging the consciousness. In addition, the eyesight is also impaired by beer and other alcohol, because the toxins also damage the retina. Beer also makes the human being lax and can cause fat formation, alcohol-related fatty liver disease, and obesity. In the context of the damage to the consciousness, it also impairs the rapid functioning of the intellect, the intelligence, and consequently also the thoughts and feelings, however also the physical reaction and movement ability. Like any alcoholic beverage, which also includes beverages reduced in alcohol, that is to say propagated as non-alcoholic due to the reduction, beer too is a major factor when it comes to cirrhosis of the liver comment by Billy, shrinkage of the liver. This is a chronically advanced disease of the liver characterized by destruction of the liver cells and the alteration of the organ structure. During this process, therefore, there is a progressive alteration to scarred connective tissue, that is to say a transformation of the liver, that is to say a parenchymal alteration. Once this alteration has taken place, the normal liver function and architecture can no longer be restored, which means that the liver function is impaired, whereby all sorts of physical ailments arise that lead up to the impairment of the consciousness and to the dumbing down of the consciousness, as well as to delusions, which you once called drunkard's insanity. Beer is in this respect as dangerous as wine or distilled spirits, and namely already in small quantities, if this is drunk regularly. Chronic alcoholism is already given if alcohol is consumed several times a week, whereby I refer to a 2 to 3 times consumption of alcohol in small quantities, because this already leads to the damage of the liver and causes all kinds of ailments, as well as the damage of the consciousness, the ability to react, and the mobility of the intelligence, the intellect, and hence also the thoughts and feelings. Alcohol consumption of any kind, with beer taking a particularly harmful rank, leads to wrong nutrition and malnutrition, whereby even small quantities lead to slight inflammations of the liver, which as a rule are not recognized by either those who drink alcohol or any earthly physicians who may have been consulted. Fact is that all kinds of alcoholic beverages, in particular beer, whether strong or weakly alcoholic, cause metabolic disorders and also destroy the physical balance of bases to a great extent, leading to pains, discomfort, and nausea, etc. Apart from the aforementioned, alcohol consumers must also reckon with suffering bile duct occlusions and being struck by many other health-impairing bad things. This is to be said in a nutshell about the consequences of beer and other alcohol consumption.
I didn't know that, but I have always regarded beer as a sad rotgut.
Also, other alcoholic beverages of any kind are harmful to health in the same or similar way, and that namely depending on the level of alcohol by volume and the amount that is drunk.
But you also have alcoholic drinks.
This is not quite right because they are only alcohol-like beverages, but they are not really alcohol-containing.
However, you and Quetzal have also already drunk peach wine at my place, which had a little alcohol.
These were absolutely only a few exceptions. We had never had such drinks before, and we do not drink them since. Although the wine tasted really good, I cannot say that the alcohol was not noticeable.
If I'm not mistaken, we last drank such wine on my birthday in the year 1992. But something else. We talked several times about sugar, whereby, though only once, something was put down in writing about it. On one occasion, however, you said something about aggressions in connection with sugar, blood, and meat. There was also something about porcelain, with you saying that Butker was not the inventor of it. Can you please say something about that again?
You're right on the topic of drinking wine. Concerning the other 2 points, I have only briefly mentioned something, but I have not given any further explanation of it. So that is what I want to do now. Sugar, blood, and meat, if they are frequently eaten, lead to aggressions, whereby those people who often eat these foods are easily irascible and not very resilient in terms of their nerves, quickly lose control over themselves, and become angry. And as regards the porcelain, it is indeed the case that the young alchemist Johann Friedrich Böttger is mistakenly credited with the invention of porcelain, although he did not invent the porcelain, but truthfully only developed it further after the death of the inventor. The true inventor, who for the first time created porcelain in 1706, namely the red porcelain, was Ehrenfried Walter Graf von Tschirnhaus, born on the 10th of April, 1651, and deceased on the 11th of October, 1708, in whose service Johann Friedrich Böttger stood. In 1708, Tschirnhaus succeeded in producing white porcelain for the first time, after which he died shortly afterwards. His assistant Böttger, born in Schleiz on the 4th of February, 1862, deceased in Dresden on the 13th of March, 1719, was originally a pharmacist's assistant, and after Tschirnhaus's death, he continued the experiments. Böttger alleged that he would be able to make gold as an alchemist. In 1701, he fled from Prussia to Saxony, where August the Strong put him under an obligation to produce gold, which of course he failed to do. So in 1704, he was subordinated to Ehrenfried Walter Graf von Tschirnhaus, who already since the years 1693 and 1694 was engaged in melting experiments with large burning lenses for the manufacturing of ceramics. The hard red-brown to coffee-brown porcelain he created, which in the 18th century was given the name Jaspis porcelain, and in 1919 experienced a new development, was unfortunately mistakenly traded as Böttger porcelain.
Well, since then, when we still drank the peach wine, I could do to my medicines, only occasionally, maybe every 3 or 4 years, drink a small glass of wine or a teaspoonful of coffee liqueur or cherry brandy as a mixture in coffee, simply for the taste. But that has already been over for years, because my medicines do no longer allow me to drink any alcohol at all. However, I don't miss it either. And what you have now been saying in terms of sugar, flesh, and blood will not please many a person. With regard to the invention of porcelain, I suppose history has to be rewritten because we still learned at school that Böttger would be the inventor.
That is known to me. And it is good that you avoid the alcohol, just as it is good that you gave up smoking on the 4th of May, 1984.
I also think it's good. There is something else that interests me, namely the fact that men's sperm production is decreasing all the time. What is the reason for that? Do you know it? And on the 16th of September, we talked about shock waves in relation to how harmful they can be. What about the vibrational swinging waves of machines, working tools, sports equipment, cars, excavators, actual vibrators and bulldozers, etc.?
Yes, I am knowledgeable about that. This is a process that is linked to the pollution of the environment. And this process was triggered by the Earth humans themselves, and namely by the release of pesticides and other chemical means into the open nature. As a result, already for about 50 years, vast, fertile landscapes of the Earth have been contaminated with pesticides to such an extent that not only the soil, but also the plants of all kinds have become carriers of dangerous and harmful to health pesticides and hormonally active substances, etc. In this way, these substances are also deposited in the fruits, in all grain, as well as in all legumes and in all vegetables, and apart from that, they also impregnate the air and the waters. All these substances are extremely harmful to health, weaken the immune system, and cause cancer in addition to many other ailments, just as they also affect the sperm production of men and lead to deforming changes in the reproductive organs. In addition to this, the sperms are also destroyed, with the result that their number is steadily dwindling and fewer of them are viable. Furthermore, the sperms too suffer deforming changes, such as, for example, that they have two heads. The quality of the sperms becomes worse and worse due to the toxic influences, which also impairs the health of the fathered offspring. However, the aforementioned toxins are not yet all, because also in other ways various toxins are released and absorbed by the Earth humans, and indeed not only by adults, but also by small children. In this respect, various types of plastic products that release toxins also play a very important role, especially those in which food and beverages are stored or which are used for eating and drinking. Various plastic products, such as bottles, cups and plates, as well as cutlery, etc., excrete very dangerous toxins, such as, for example, bisphenol, which lead to cancer of various kinds, but also to infertility of women and men, and to all sorts of mild, moderate, and severe ailments, as is also the case with the various pesticides and other chemical means. And as far as vibrational swinging waves are concerned, they can be as harmful to health as the shock waves because they affect the whole nervous system and the muscles and can, in some circumstances, cause headaches, physical pain, nausea, physical and organic damage, as well as impaired consciousness and memory. Vibrational swinging waves also adversely affect the organic functions. However, consciousness disturbances can also occur, which express themselves as psychic disturbances, slight or severe aggressions, as well as anger and hostile behavior, as well as subconsciously anchored aggressive complexes, which are not noticed by the affected person and erupt at every fitting occasion. As you know very well, especially such subconsciously anchored complexes also arise through psychological moments, whereby any occasion of quarrel, no matter how small, leads to subconscious hate reactions and to such complexes, which erupt at every occasion but, as already stated, are not recognized by the affected person. Affected human beings always see only themselves at the forefront and assess many things wrongly. When reproaches are made to them, justified or unjustified, because they always feel attacked, just as their subconscious complex leads them to do, which is why they immediately go on to attack and repeat the mentioned matter, poking senselessly until a quarrel arises. The whole matter rests in a deeply buried hate complex, which is not recognized by those affected and consequently also disputed by them. This results in them, without the persons affected by the complex knowing or perceiving it themselves, just waiting for someone to turn things or words, justified or unjustified, against them so that they can react aggressively in anger or with fist fight and uncontrolled to satisfy their subconscious complex.
I'm familiar with all that, but it's nevertheless extremely unpleasant what you say. What's terrible about this is that human beings, male or female, don't want to be taught in these matters. Consequently, they don't change their terrible behavior for the better. Seldom are there human beings who open their ears to good advice and then change and control their behavior. And with regard to plastic wares, so for food and drink products, no plastic articles should be used that secrete toxins, instead only clay, porcelain, wood, glass, and metal. And as far as the vibrational swinging waves are concerned, they can apparently all be just as dangerous as the shock waves.
That corresponds to what I said.
In this context, care must also be taken with metal goods, because anything that emits tin, zinc, copper, aluminium, and lead should be avoided if at all possible, as should certain special alloys of other substances which are used to manufacture certain coatings in cooking utensils and dishes. But there is something about which I have already been asked twice in recent times. How should we really handle things with regard to the names of Plejyaran's persons, and in general with regard to Plejyaran's terms and designations, etc.? After all, you once said that these should be retained and not changed if, for example, contact reports are translated into other languages.
I did indeed say that because for the meaning of the names and terms, it is absolutely necessary that they be written and pronounced in the form of the Plejyaran's language that we have given them. If this is not done, totally false forms of meaning arise, which no longer harmonize with the actual value of the name or term.
So,
the names and terms of your language shall, that is to say, must always be the same in all earthly languages, as is the case in our German and Swiss German languages, and namely, regardless of whether the names and terms are used in other languages such as English, French, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Russian, etc. If this is not done, then name and term falsifications arise.
That corresponds to the meaning of my words. Even a single change by a single syllable or by a single letter results in a completely different and, as a rule, negative sense and unvalue, as, for example, with the name of my daughter, Simya-se, when the E at the end of the name is pronounced as I in English. Simya-se is a very old name which we Plejyarans took from an old Lyran dialect. It means the demigoddess. But if the E at the end of the name is pronounced as I, as it, for example, done in the English language, then this results in a very evil unvalue. Sem, in relation to Simya-se, means half in the mentioned old Lyran dialect, while Jace means goddess, however Jasi means goddess of the curse. Thus, if in the English language for the name Simya-se the E at the end is pronounced as I, thus as Semjasi, the name semi-goddess of the curse results from this. Such false name and term unvalues, that is to say, unvalues, result in our languages and their dialects even if only a single letter in the word itself is pronounced incorrectly and thus differently than it is given in the written form.
It is therefore then the same as in the German language, that every name and every term has only its rightness and its real value if it is read and spoken as it is actually written. Also, with name abbreviations, there is a particular case that the meaning sometimes changes into the negative, as for example in the awful case with the names Andres or Andreas, if these are abbreviated with Andi, which then means dirt dog or dirty dog. With regard to the term Plejyarans, it is therefore in my opinion the same. Hence Plejyarans must not be called differently than just Plejyarans. But still another question concerning the weather situation, because I was asked about it. What is in that regard going to happen in the near future, also elsewhere, in terms of extraordinary events?
What you say corresponds to the rightness, and as far as the term Plejarens is concerned, our system is named according to a likewise very old dialect of the Old Lyran language. Pul means sevenness, and Jaren is to be equated with law. As inhabitants of this system, we are Plejarens. Only concerning the individual person the N at the end of the term changes or is omitted, so that a woman is therefore a Plejarya and a man is a Plejar. The term Plejarens has the value law of the sevenness, whereas for the term Plejarya, the jara means as much as female resident, and thus female resident of the sevenness, and for the term Plejar, the second part of the word jar means thus resident, and the whole term therefore means resident of the sevenness. If Plejar would at the end of the term be pronounced with I, this would result in the unvalue destruction. Changes in the pronunciation also result in negative, that is to say, unvalues for the term Plejarens and Plejar. If the term is pronounced incorrectly with an I, at the end, that is Plejareni, then the value destruction is added to the word part jari, hence the unvalued destruction of the sevenness arises from the term. Regarding your question about the weather situation, it has to be said that in all of Europe and in different parts of the USA and even in Las Vegas, etc., as well as from the east to the west coast of Canada, extraordinary weather situations will arise. On the one hand, unusually abundant snowfalls and ice rains will occur in various countries, as in the USA, Canada, and also in various parts of Europe, while other countries will be affected by torrential rainfalls, which will cause great floods and deluges and will cause great destruction, in addition to the fact that human lives will be mourned. After that, Europe, like other parts of the world too, will be affected for weeks by unusually prolonged, severe cold, which will continue into the month of February because new shifts with regard to the fundamental causes of climate change will arise.
Mountain valleys cut off from the outside world. Der Landbote, winter 3rd Tuesday, the 16th of December, 2008. Snow causes traffic chaos. Der Landbote, winter 3rd Thursday, the 18th of December, 2008.
The coldness will be unusual because a climatic warming has already taken place, as a result of which the winter should normally be milder.
Winter delights clouded by traffic chaos. Over 200 accidents on snow-covered roads. Zürcher Oberländer, Anzeiger von Uster, Wetzikon. Monday, the 22nd of December cold spell continues to keep Europe in firm grip. Der Landbote. Winterthur. Wednesday, the 7th of January 2009 snowstorms and icy rains in the USA. Der Landbote. The 22nd of December 2008, Hurricane Low brings lightning and thunder. Der Landbote. Saturday, the 24th of January 2009 avalanches claim lives and injure persons. Der Landbote. The 26th of January 2009. After the storms, the rain came. Der Landbote. The 28th of January 2009, hurricane caused 21 deaths in Spain, France, Italy, Tagesanzeiger, Zurich. The 26th of January 2009, Hurricane Klaus raged in southern Europe. Der Landbote. The 28th of January 2009, the British capital surrenders to the snow. Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Tuesday, the 3rd of February 2009, snow causes chaos in Europe. Der Landbote. Tuesday, the 3rd of February 2009.
From mid-January onwards, there will be severe hurricanes and winter storms, which will cause major destruction in many places in Europe, bring a lot of rainfall, and also claim several lives. As for something particularly out of the ordinary, perhaps the only thing that has to be mentioned is that your efforts are slowly coming to fruition on the earth, namely with regard to your efforts to explain to the Earth humans that they should not simply marry unprepared, but should only do so after thorough checks, as is also the case with us.
Without a marriage course, there will be no marriage. Der Landbote, winter 3rd, Tuesday, the 3rd of February 2009.
Around the end of the month of January next year, in Indonesia, something similar will be introduced by law, albeit only a short course, but at least that.
A marriage course, that is delightful. This might then contribute to marriages working better and to fewer divorces taking place. But what about Switzerland with regard to the weather?
Especially in the month of December, Switzerland will also be affected by heavy and exceptional snowfalls all the way to the south of the country, and then by very cold weather. Snow and cold will persist in the month of January, and that all the way into February, as I have already said earlier. Then there will be new heavy snowfalls at the beginning of February, for example also in England and other parts of Europe, and again the south of Switzerland will also be affected by it. However, what I want to ask, this article, which you have here sitting on your desk, does Ask It have it too? It is unknown to me. May I have this original? It seems to me to be one because the yellowed paper indicates it.
Certainly you can have the article. It is already old, because I originally wrote it on the 3rd of February 1959 and sent it to a newspaper in expectation that it will be published. The Limmataler Tagblatt, however, took out only a few passages and in a completely falsifying way turned them into 2 new and shorter articles, which were then published on the 18th of February 1959 under the pseudonym Araba. This heavily yellowed newspaper sheet from back then contains the 2 falsified articles which no longer have much in common with my original article. Look here, these are the ones.
Very regrettable, but may I quickly glance over everything?
Of course.
Tay, after about 10 minutes of reading,
Really very unfortunate that your detailed, prophetic, and predictive statements recorded here were not published, but immensely falsified and turned into nothingness. It would be appropriate if you were nevertheless still going to publish the whole matter, namely in one of your bulletins, because newspapers will not present these words and statements to their readers. That they are probably too cowardly to do so, as you mentioned, would also be the case in this day and age. May I also keep this original newspaper page for my archive?
I would like to keep the original page of the newspaper, but I will give you a tidy copy or a scanned version during one of your next visits, if that is all right with you. And should I then insert the whole matter at this point at which we are currently talking, when I retrieve the contact conversation, because I think that it will also be of interest for the future time?
A copy will also be enough for me.
Okay. Then I will make a transcript or have the whole bit scanned so I have it then in the computer and can print it out. But what about the insertion of the articles?
Certainly. Insert them right after my answer.
The following article was submitted in February 1959 to the editorial staff of the newspaper Limmataler Tagblatt for publication. Unfortunately, however, the article was not published in its original version, but on Wednesday, the 18th of February 1959, completely changed, distorted, and falsified with the title Towards the End of the Humankind, as well as with the pseudonym Araba, added at the end of the article. Fact is that apart from that, all my articles with similar contents were rejected by different other newspapers and magazines, which has not changed to this present day. Just one single small reader's letter from me personally, Billy Edward Albert Meyer, has so far been published, and indeed only in abbreviated form. Quite obviously, newspapers and journals are not interested and not willing to make known to their readers the prophetic and predictive truth, but, probably out of cowardice, to deprive them of it, and instead of this to widely publish senseless and blatantly false prophecies fabricated by false prophets.
the human of the earth does not think much of truthfully prophecies and predictions.
Every new century and every new decade, as well as every new millennium, tempts many believers. Clairvoyants, fabulators from reading the stars, astrologers and self-proclaimed sublime ones, gurus, self-proclaimed prophets, and all sorts of other sectarians to make prophecies which, however, will with certainty not come true. And so it will be again in respect of the new decade, and even more so at the turn of the millennium to the third millennium. Such prophecies of all shades have an immemorial tradition and date back to the Mayan times and to all religions and sects. And indeed, in addition to real prophecies and predictions of great importance and true value, which have been and are given by responsible seers and truthly prophets and proclaimers of the earthly humankind. Of course, when it comes to prophecies, the human being must always thoroughly think about deciphering the often occurring encodings, just as he or she must also know that prophecies of religiously tinted and self-proclaimed prophets contain a tremendous amount of nonsense. Therefore, a prophecy must always be received with a certain caution, whereby every human being must also be aware that each prophecy needs not fulfill itself, because each one is changeable and can be deactivated if it is counteracted with intellect, rationality, and logic in the right way. In contrast to this are the predictions that predict very specific events that will indubitably and infallibly occur and cannot be changed. But in truth, only very few human beings of Earth strive for really truthful prophecies and predictions, because the majority do not think much of it. Contrary to this, the vast masses, who believe in religions and sects, turn to all sorts of charlatans and false teachers, who pretend to be self-proclaimed prophets, gurus, sublime ones, godly ones and saints, as well as mouthpieces of God or Jesus Christ, etc., and guide everyone into the unreal by falsely teaching senseless religious and sectarian empty phrases. Well, particularly the Christian world is teeming with religious and sectarian prophecies, whereby also in the Bible, namely in the Revelation of John, prophecies regarding the history of the world and the end of the world are being expressed. This Revelation of John occupies an ever broader space in the thinking of the Christian peoples, and this because in the face of world political apocalyptic events, earthly Christian humanity is increasingly taking refuge in its imaginary God, the Bible, and in senseless prayers. In this context, the fact that the Christian belief is to be spread more around the world in order to make all the other religions disappear also plays a role. Thus, the Christian belief is to be fostered vehemently again and help for the rapid spreading of Christianity. However, during this process, the fact that precisely in this way hatred is sown worldwide in other religions among religious fundamentalists and extremists against the Christian world is not taken into account, which, though, will lead to cruel revenge, as a foresight into the future proves. So it will be that in the coming 50 years many new sects will emerge, which will develop new and fanatical belief directions against the Mother Church, preaching the heavenly salvation by committing suicide, whereby masses of human beings kill themselves or are murdered by believing henchmen. But this will not be enough, because through the Christian belief, not only many will fall into schizophrenic delusions, whereby especially the changes of the following decades, as well as especially the changes of century and millennium, will bring much calamity and death to the ranks of the believers. Young persons will be educated suggestively to become sectarian fanatics, just as adults will fall for the same fanaticism, whereby murders will be committed under the delusion of belief, and the harmony of families and friendships will also break up. But this will only be the beginning, because the action of the Christian world, which with its belief also interferes with other religions through acts of war and humiliates their believers, creates a worldwide hatred against Christianity, which leads to a world-encompassing terrorism, by which innumerable innocent human beings are murdered. In particular, the hatred against Christians is increasing among fundamentalist extremist Islamists all over the world, whereby especially the USA and its allies in all sorts of countries who intrude into foreign countries and wage war will feel the might of Islamist terror. Because of their fault, tens of thousands of innocent human beings will be murdered by the fanatical and irresponsible terrorists, whereby these monstrous, terrible things will extend far into the third millennium. Not only hatred, Wars and terror alone will bring enormous suffering to countless human beings in the time to come, but also a tremendous climate change which will become an emergency and which is caused by the fault of the human beings of Earth and had already made its beginning in the middle of the 19th century, whereby the terrible thing is to be traced back to the rampant overpopulation. And everything will become very bad because nature will rebel and cause enormous destructions of all kinds, but also hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions of human lives. The overpopulation will destroy the nature and the climate, because everything will be too much for them due to the human beings' machinations. The waters and the entire nature will be poisoned. The resources of the earth will be exploited senselessly and irresponsibly. The atmosphere will be polluted with exhaust fumes and toxins. The earth will by huge explosions be made to tremble and to bring about volcanic eruptions. Among the human beings, new diseases and epidemics will be caused. The interpersonal relationships will be destroyed and unparalleled. Unconcernedness will be sown, which will lead to a situation in which already the children and young persons get very badly out of the control of the good human nature and will hit other human beings without hesitation and kill them. And it will be that many human beings of all countries will flee their homes and seek shelter in industrialized countries, whereby little by little ever larger migrations of peoples will arise and create enormous problems in the states where they want to settle. Thus, one catastrophe will meet another, as will wars, uprisings, and revolutions, which will always be accompanied by many deaths and enormous devastations. Misery and hardship will increase unstoppably instead of easing themselves, because the more the total number of the earthly population increases, the more all terrible things and problems will grow out of control and increase till the unmeasurable. It is true that there have always been wars, revolutions, and catastrophes, and they have determined the lives of the human beings on the Earth's globe since time immemorial. Everything related to this has already existed since the beginning of the history of human beings, and it dominates the lives of peoples until today. However, what is now impending for the human beings of Earth that has never occurred before, and it will surpass everything that the human being can imagine, because the future will bring things and events that will outdo everything that has happened in former times and until today. Regrettably, it is true that the human beings of Earth, as allies with regard to wars, have already in most ancient times been the biggest movers and could not do without them. Their hatred, their rapacity, their greed for profit and might, as well as their jealousy, imperiousness, their craving for revenge and retaliation were always mightier than the urge for love and peace. And when truthful prophecies and predictions were given to them so that they should bethink themselves of something better, then they did not consider it as worth anything and rejected it all. So even before, during, and after antiquity, a continuous state of war, but not a state of peace, has prevailed among the human being people of Earth. Totaling up the times of the last 10,000 years, it turns out that during this time, a mere 250 years have passed without war among the human beings of the earth. Truly, for a being endowed with rationality, as the human being is, an unmatched evidence of incapacity. As means of the Gewalt, to hold one's own and to assert oneself, the human being of Earth, with all its evil, barbaric, irresponsible, and conscienceless as well as unhuman effects, has not bypassed any era. On the contrary, as paradoxical as it may seem, he or she has even set many things in motion, with regard to the entire development in every respect, thus, of course, also with regard to the weapons technology, which again, how could it possibly be otherwise? Promoted the warfare technology and all the more led to murderous and destructive wars. The human being as the main agitator and destroyer is traversing the earth as a double-sided and shady appearance which cannot come to rest namely, not as long as movement in the wave of the coming into being and passing away becomes history. So unfortunately, he or she still today, and regrettably even until the distant future, sees in his or her unchangeability as means with Gewaltsamkeit, as final solution, always only the Gewalt, the war and the terrorism, and that in spite of the existence of the United Nations. He or she simply wants to break the will and the resistance of the opponent with all conceivable means, if nothing is achieved by negotiations, in case negotiations are even considered in the first place, which will in coming time several times not be the case. In the same way as in earlier times, when the USA with its allies will belligerently invade foreign countries in the Far East and in the Orient, as well as in the Hindu Kush, and will be responsible for tens of thousands of deaths, for torture, rapes, as well as for immense destructions of psychically completely demolished war heroes. Viewing politics and how it is conducted worldwide, it can be recognized that this too is nothing other than another perfidious form of war, whereby this war is simply carried out using verbal and mendacious means, from which peace can likewise never arise. And this has been the case since time immemorial, because deadly conflicts over caves, hunting spoils, edible roots, berries, and fruits have already been picked by the cave dwellers and builders of pile dwellings. At a later date, shepherds, people of hunters, and settled farmers, as well as landlords, rulers, and state authorities also staged fights and wars over land, which to this day have cost the lives of countless human beings. Due to the worldwide steadily increasing population, the living space for human beings became ever denser, and the claims in terms of priority and standing, as well as in terms of ownership and use of land and all kinds of necessary things, became ever greater. Hence, this fostered envy among those who had to forego it, and this in turn led to jealousy and hatred and to disputes arising therefrom, as well as to murder and manslaughter even in the own family, between siblings and parents. But also, the landlords, landowners, reeves, rulers, and those in government fell prey to the same habits. Accordingly, they instigated destructive, bloody, and evil wars of conquest and revenge, and brought unspeakable misery and suffering, as well as death, destruction, and depravity upon the humankind. A fact that has not changed up to the present time but has even worsened. One only has to think of the 2 world wars and all other warlike conflicts, which have for centuries and even thousands of years counted in many dozens every year. And unfortunately, the human beings of this earth are not getting any smarter, because they will continue in even worse style in the future, since they do not listen to the warnings of the true prophets and proclaimers, because they are stubborn and imperious and believing in religions and sects, as well as in false prophecies of false prophets. Sir, the human being of the earth has a low opinion of truthfully genuine prophecies and predictions, and in his imperiousness he continues to muddle along with hate, revenge, retaliatory strikes with jealousy, wars, death, destruction, and deprivation. Hence the further future looks very gloomy on this world.
The ever faster growing number of the earthly population makes the existing and newly emerging problems increase by leaps and bounds year after year, and they can no longer be brought under control.
But this means that everything in terms of problems is also becoming out of hand, and that these can no longer be mastered. However, it also means that new conflicts of all kinds are continuously appearing, and that all over the world gone crazy, pathologically irrational, and irresponsible imperious ones who might let wars break out to satisfy their own insanity. If one looks at the war machinations since ancient times, then it can be recognized that the basic rules of war were that groups from the peoples were forming a mob, as well as that rulers hired or nurtured soldiers who fought each other murderously to the very last man. This fact has not changed since then and has persisted to the present time, and it will continue to be so until far into the future. And that all this is in accordance with the truth is proven by many accounts of wars and battles, as well as other bloody conflicts between soldiers, armies, and non-military groupings. Fundamentally, in all conflicts and wars of all kinds, there have always been battlefronts forming where the murderous clashes and battles were ultimately fought and decided. However, this strategy will change in the future, because many of the coming wars and conflicts will be carried out in a widely dissipated way, in form of guerrilla wars, by terrorism, and by armies that strike, murder, and destroy everywhere at the same time with evil gevalt. And the fact that in this process torturing and raping, robbing and stealing will continue as ever will only change to the effect that everything will get even worse. And proof that this is indeed the case, that there is actually no longer only fighting on one front, as was still the case in the Antiquity and in the Middle Ages, but on several fronts at the same time, can already be seen in the fact of the multi-front battles of the Second World War. Hence, everything has already changed in the new time. True prophets brought and bring truthful prophecies and predictions, but the human beings of earth do not want to hear them, but only the false prophecies of false prophets, which are all religiously bonded. That is why the human beings also do not think differently than before. Just as in the old time, they are not particularly moved by world events and war events because conflicts and wars are everyday occurrences worldwide. As human beings of the present time, surrounded by wars and conflicts, their thoughts are not moved any more strongly than when someone unknown to them falls into unfortune. Thus, they also do not care if a war is started or ended because it does not affect them themselves. Nor does the human being of earth care that he or she generally places himself or herself as a destroyer in an ever greater contrariness to the development, which the longer the more is directed towards nothing but the possession and increase of his or her material goods. The fact that in his or her war delusion he has destroyed irreplaceable values of the Antiquity and the early and late Middle Ages and will continue to destroy and eliminate does not concern him or her either. He or she learns well from history that in the ancient world, irreplaceable things were laid in ruins by senseless wars of conquest, just as many things were destroyed and countless human beings murdered by religious wars. But all this was far surpassed by the 2 world wars of the 20th century, which, however, is already as good as sunken into oblivion, because the human beings of earth do not like to think of their crimes and ignominies. However, they will not do this in the future either, when the modern wars will roll over the earth and its peoples and bring unspeakable suffering as well as immense destructions, because the destructive power of the new weapons, which will now be developed and used in the next decades and in the 3rd millennium, surpasses everything that the ordinary human being can imagine. Thus, the modern wars which will be waged from now on have an even much greater inherent destructive force than that which was given in the Second World War. This is not only in relation to the mass killing of human beings and with regard to the destruction of all kinds of goods, things, and human achievements, but also in relation to the fact that in the world there is more and more that human beings have created which can be destroyed. The political and religious wars of the ancient times spread throughout the whole of Europe, Asia, and the Orient, but these were always only strips-like war campaigns, while in the new time they have become more expansive in terms of space and even worldwide and have cleared out countrywide areas. Thus today the world is affected by wars, while in earlier times individual opponents confronted each other and fought battles in the open field. Today, and in the further future of the planet and its humankind, much larger war bases are forming all over the earth, whereby millions of military personnel are showing up. China alone will dispose of an army in the third millennium, which has to be calculated at well over 1 million men. This, while at the same time Switzerland will reduce its army, but will also breach its direct neutrality by committing its own military to foreign engagements for so-called peace tasks, in which many other states will also participate. But truthfully, they will be peace war engagements that undermine Switzerland's neutrality and trample it underfoot. In this way, Switzerland will in future also contribute to making the whole world, in its expanse, the workplace and dwelling place of war, which is fed with weapons of all kinds from all sorts of sources, whereby Switzerland too supplies modern lethal weapons all over the world and contributes to the flourishing of the wars. And so, as was the case in the Second World War, Switzerland too will be directed towards all those circumstances of life and businesses with arms deliveries by which an absolute effect with regard to endless warfare on the earth will be ensured. The USA is and will also remain involved in this disaster of warmongering. And just as they have brought warfare to an apocalyptic form by dropping nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, their coming preparations for war and acts of war will take on even far worse forms and will also force other states such as Russia and China as well as India, Pakistan, Israel, and other countries to upgrade their arms with nuclear weapons and with ever more modern, murderous, and destructive weapons. The urge of the USA and other states regarding war, murder, manslaughter, torture, rape, destruction, and annihilation will, due to criminal ones who have the might, in the coming time increase to unpredictable extents, whereby every regulation under international law will be trampled underfoot, and in fact worse than so far, and whereby the USA, Israel, and the Palestinians, as well as a worldwide Islamist terrorist organization, will take the lead in the coming time. There is no curbing of the, in this regard, horrible development, because the whole world yells in favor of and cheers for all the evil deeds of those who have got the might in their bloody hands. And if the peoples raise their voices, then they will not be heard, because the ruling over life and death of the humankind as well as with regard to destruction, annihilation, torture, rape as well as murder and manslaughter will, as since ancient times also in the coming time, lie alone in the bloodthirsty hands of some unscrupulous holders of might, despots and criminals against the humankind. They are the very ones who continuously bring the world to the brink of the war, or actually into the war with threats, breaches of contract, imperiousness, religious delusion, and with ultimatums. In their delusion of conquest or revenge, as has been the case since ancient times, they are unable to assess that the lives of many human beings and even entire peoples are being wiped out for all time. It is precisely this that is already in the offing and will become terrible reality in a few decades' time, and will carry itself far into the third millennium. And in order for everything to get rolling, the hatred and the pathological craving for revenge are built up, for which a religious or political belief, a religious word or prayer, a misunderstanding or a careless action can suffice to trigger a sudden irrational act or to carry out a planned mass murder or destruction plan. In the future, it may even come to the point where a crazy, mightful one of state or terrorist activates the push button which kills the major part of humankind, destroys almost all human achievements, and burns the earth, making it only difficult or impossible to live on for decades or even centuries. Unfortunately, it will still take a very long time until the terrible despots, scrupulous ones who have might and criminals against humankind no longer reach the might. That is why the coming time will still be full of them. Consequently, malicious and murderous wars will still take their toll for a long time, and also the next 50 years will be severely characterized by it, during which time also many country names will be changed. Hence the Balkans will be just as affected by this as the Hindu Kush. as will Israel and Palestine and the Middle East in general, but India and Pakistan, as well as Korea and states in South America and Africa, will also be severely shaken by warlike conflicts in the near future, whereby in many cases the USA will be directly or indirectly co-meddling. But this also leads to parts of states separating themselves from the motherland and striving for an autonomy, which in many cases leads to new armed conflicts, while elsewhere guerrilla organizations fight against the governments, take hundreds and thousands of hostages and murder many of them. This while terrorists are inflicting mischief worldwide and causing the deaths of many human beings because they are indulging in their lust for murder and their fanatical, fundamentalistically extreme belief delusion, and have fallen prey to the delusion that all humankind would have to turn to their belief. The truth is that in the time to come, the entire sciences and the entire arms industry and engineering of the world will work feverishly as never before on steadily new and more deadly weapons of war, methods of war and torture, as well as methods of destruction and murder, in order to bring about the annihilation of entire armies and peoples, and namely to a degree that has never before been possible, and that surpasses everything that the human being may dream of. Truly, in earlier times a certain chivalry was somehow still given during the wars, but there is nothing left of it in the new time. In time to come, however, things will get even worse, because the killing of human beings will become more and more unpersonal, more murderous, unhuman, and ever more at a distance, which will make the killing easier and easier because surely one does not look the others in the eye anymore, does not see their anxiety and not their pleading for mercy. Thus, the individual human beings no longer matter, nor do even entire peoples, and certainly not their voices. It is with great worry that I look ahead to the unstoppable development that will still take place during my lifetime and will bring very many wars, conflicts, revolts, deaths, destruction, crime, and annihilations. By the accumulation of so much energy for war as the human being of Earth possesses it, and by the potential of his or her belligerent means of destruction, a foreseeable peace on Earth seems to be become more and more unforeseeable and steadily carried farther away. In fact, the rate of exchange for the human being's life is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and those who keep their eyes and ears open make the frightening observation that also our tiny Switzerland, which does not dispose of cities with over 1 million inhabitants or other large cities, is in the year 1959 still suffering from the direct after-effects of the Second World War. And it is a fact that an ever-increasing number of serious criminal cases are taking place. Murder, robbery with murder and homicide, as well as assaults and robbery alternate within a short period of time and take on the character of everyday events. However, this is only the beginning because in the coming time the whole thing will increase to such an extent that the overview about it will be lost. But the human beings are a creature of habit. Therefore, they quickly forget such things again, and on the other hand, they become thought-feeling-based so dulled by the recurrence of particularly brutal deeds and crimes that they just acknowledge everything with a banal shrug of the shoulders. However, if one takes a closer look at everything, then it is unavoidable to get somewhat to the bottom of the growing criminality. The truth is actually fundamentally concealed, and everything is falsely blamed on the extraordinarily large number of foreigners who are said to have found their criminal field of activity in Switzerland. Certainly there are criminal foreigners, but they cannot be described as predominantly criminals, because among them this applies only to a certain percentage, just like among the Swiss themselves. On the whole, if one takes a closer look at the matter of the criminal and the felonious, it is noticeable that the accumulation of crimes is more and more directed against life and limb, as well as against the property and assets of the human beings. A fact that in the coming time and until into the third millennium will become more and more abundant and brutal. In all this, the passion does not matter, which makes the human being the violent lawbreaker, murderer, manslaughterer, and robber of the most valuable goods, but rather the bare joy for Gavolt, as well as the greed for money, addiction to profit, and the materialism. The human being's impetuous striving for Gavolt, joy and lust that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, as well as for profit without work and effort, is the actual reason that makes him or her the criminal and lets him or her esteem the life of the other extremely little. Hence, it is annihilated consciencelessly if an adversary stands in the way. The innate, deep-grounding deference to life, as primal cause of true human culture, is more and more disregarded by the human being, and will in the coming time be even much more in decline, which will take on very terrible forms towards and after the turn of the millennium. In place of deference to and towards life, there is ever more the nefarious egocentricity and imperiousness, which unstoppably leads to an absence of authority and a consciousness-based absence of orientation, through which all interpersonal relationships are poisoned, which in turn undermines every truthful connection. The aforementioned are collectively matters which the human being of earth should think of today more than ever, and namely especially in the field of the education of the children of the upcoming generations. Truthfully, it is not enough simply to complain about the ever-increasing occurrence of getting very badly out of the control of the good human nature in children, adolescents, and young persons. Rather, one has to look more than ever for higher values during the education, and must also impart them to the educators. To this end, not only the parents, but also the educators, the grandparents, friends, and acquaintances are called in this time of the materialistic satiety to exercise a consciousness-based, good, valueful, and ethical leading role. This is something that every human being who is educationally involved with young people must be particularly aware of today, and especially in the coming time after 1980. The growing serious criminality and the delinquency are entering an epoch that will enjoy an unheard-of material prosperity and a financial vastness, which, however, shall be a warning signal for all, because this material miracle will suffer a terrible defeat when the third millennium will open its gates. Therefore, you human beings of earth, be vigilant in all things, and strive that you yourselves and your authorities' leading circles may come to the self-reflection, so that all of you may live and act rightfully, and that you may incline and heed the true prophecies and predictions.
Witikon ZH, Tuesday, the 3rd of February, 1959, Edward A. Meyer. In the following, the original transcript of the 2 articles of the Limmatler Zeitung referred to at the beginning. Towards the end of humankind,
the prophecies of the Bible about the history of the world and about the end of the world, expressed in the Revelation of John, are taking an ever greater place in the thinking of the peoples, because the humankind in the face of world political, apocalyptic events is more and more taking refuge in God and the Bible in order to help in the renewal and spread of the Christianity. Wars, revolutions, and catastrophes have determined the lives of the human beings on the globe since time immemorial. They have therefore been at the beginning of the history of human beings, and they dominate the lives of peoples until today. As allies, they were already in most ancient times the biggest movers, which the human beings have unfortunately never been able to do without. Therefore, already in ancient times, war, not the state of peace, reigned over the people. As means of the Gewalt, to assert oneself and to prevail, it did with all its effects not pass by any time era. Yes, it even, as paradoxical as this may seem, brought only through it many things into motion. As the biggest pathogen and destroyer, it steps across the earth, a double-faced phenomenon that cannot come to rest. As long as movement in the wave of the becoming and passing becomes history, and so, unfortunately, it's still today, in its immutability as a means with Gewaltsamkeit, despite the existence of the United Nations, represents the ultimate solution, to break the will and resistance of the enemy, when negotiations, that is, the politicians have achieved nothing, or as the German General von Clausewitz, one of the most important military writers, said, "The war is the continuation of politics by other means," while the German commander-in-chief, Erich von Ludendorff, made the statement, "The peace is the continuation of the war by other means." The battle for the land began already with the shepherds and hunter peoples and the farmers who had settled down, when the demands for priority and prestige clashed with use and possession. One of the fundamental rules of the war, however, was that only soldiers fight each other. Again and again, portrayals of battles from all centuries can be found on which spectators, non-soldiers, are depicted. These were neutral, nothing could happen to them. The war was decided in the battle along the fronts. Even though the forms have continuously changed, the nature of the wars in the antiquity, throughout the Middle Ages and into the new time, has remained almost unchanged. So today, as human beings of the 20th century, surrounded and threatened by wars, nothing moves us more strongly than the thought that war has not ceased to be the decisive factor in the life of the peoples. Although in its role as destroyer, it puts itself in an ever greater contrast to the development that is directed entirely towards the increase of the goods. It is true that irreplaceable assets were destroyed in the antiquity and in the early Middle Ages, when the whole ancient world fell into ruins in wars of conquest. And yet the modern war has an even greater destructive force, not only because it is better at killing and annihilating, but because it allows to let the world be more destroyed. The wars have also become more addicted to space. Wars of all time have traversed all of Europe and Asia, but have only taken strips. The most recent wars of the new time have cleared out entire widths of countries. As a result of today's wars, it is no longer individual, enemies standing isolated in their space, who are called to battle, but the whole world is affected. Thus today, spread all over the globe, far larger bases of war are forming, which spit out armies of millions that turn countries in their entire expanse into workplaces and dwellings of the war, which is preferably nourished from all sources and geared to all living conditions in order to be certain of its effect. Due to the ongoing experiments with nuclear weapons, the preparations for war alone have already taken on apocalyptic forms. The urge to annihilate is increased into the uncalculable, and no regulation under international law has been able to stop this scary development until today. The voices of the peoples are not heard. The decision about life and death of the humankind lies in the hands of some unscrupulous despots in the East, who constantly bring the world to the brink of war with breaches of treaties and ultimata, because in their delusion for conquest they are no longer able to discern that the life of their peoples would first and foremost be extinguished for all times in a future war. A sudden irrational act, a misunderstanding, or even just a careless act could trigger the push-button war, destroy the lives of the majority of the humankind, and make the scorched earth uninhabitable for decades to come. At the present time, however, it seems that insightful elements are at work around Khrushchev, the worst of the despots, the same elements that prevented him from pushing Red China into a war against the USA because of Formosa, and who also seem to realize that the Berlin Ultimatum would not result in a gain, but instead in the total destruction of Russia and its peoples, and who are prepared, even at the risk of the greatest loss of prestige, not to let matters reach their most extreme. The entire science, the technology, and the industries work feverishly on the development of new weapons of war and methods for the annihilation of entire armies and peoples. There is nothing left of chivalry, which was the hallmark of the wars of earlier times. The individual human lives and the voices of the peoples no longer count. The humankind is facing this unstoppable development with great worry, because through the accumulation of so many energies and means of destruction, the total war of the 20th century seems to have come closer than ever before. Eriba.
Human life cheap in exchange.
Whoever browsed through our daily newspapers in the last few weeks made the frightening observation that in our small country, which has neither actual big cities nor to suffer from the direct after effects of a war, several serious criminal cases occurred simultaneously. Murder, robbery with murder and homicide, assault and robbery alternated within a short period of time and seemed to take on the character of everyday events. The human being is a creature of habit. That is to say, the repetition of even particularly brutal deeds and events blunts the feelings and is at most acknowledged with a shrug of the shoulders. It seems inevitable to us, however, to investigate a little the causes of the growing criminality, whereby, by the way, the fact shall not be concealed that extraordinarily many foreigners choose Switzerland as their criminal field of activity. But what should stand out the most on closer inspection is the accumulation of those crimes that are simultaneously directed against life and limb, as well as against the assets. In other words, it is not so much the human passion that lets the human being become the lawbreaker against the highest legal rights, but rather the naked addiction to profit, the greed for money, the materialism. It is the impetuous striving for profit without effort and work that leads the criminal to disrespect the human life and to annihilate it if an adversary gets in the way. We have the perceiving in a fine spiritual wise that the deep grounding deference to the life, which has been referred to by a philosopher and theologian as clear thinking as Albert Schweitzer, as the primal cause of real culture, is increasingly dwindling. In the place of this deference comes that nefarious egocentricity, that spiritual orientationlessness and crisis of authority which poison the relationships of human beings to human beings and undermine every genuine community. It seems to us that we should think of these things today more than ever, in particular in the field of the education of the up-and-coming generation. It is not enough to complain about the barbarization of the adolescents, but more than ever we have to look for higher values and also communicate these values to the youth. During this time of materialistic satiety, not only the church, but also the school, is called to a spiritual and ethical leading role, of which it is maybe not always sufficiently aware. The increase in serious criminality in an epoch which enjoys unheard of material prosperity is a warning signal which calls all leading circles to self-reflection.
Well then, I would like to return to the weather with a question about which you say that there will thus be a cold and rich in snow winter ahead.
This is only right for the first time, by which I mean the month of December, January, and February, because I have not yet made any more comprehensive foresight in this regard. However, the whole matter is indeed unusual and has to do with certain shifting causes of the climate change, as I have said before. I cannot say any more about it at the moment, although it will probably be different when I return on the 3rd of February, 2009.
Ah, then you'll be gone for so long, there's probably nothing one can do about it. But regarding other predictions, do you have anything like that, as to say natural disasters, earthquakes, seaquakes, etc., or anything that can't be considered ordinary or just remarkable? I'm also interested in what has emerged with regard to your investigations into the severe earthquake in Sichuan, China. You told me that you were conducting investigations there because you had established that the quake was not a natural tectonic event in the true sense.
This is indeed the case, so among other things in mid-December an earthquake of magnitude 5 in Sweden, which has been spared from it for about 100 years.
Earth has tremored. Zürcher Landzeitung, Oster, Friday the 30th of January, 2009. The earth tremored in Sweden. Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Wednesday the 17th of December, 2008.
Then an earthquake of magnitude 5.3 will occur on the 23rd of December in northern Italy, followed by an earthquake of magnitude 5.6 in the south near the Philippines, which will in an unusual way take place at a very great depth. The severe earthquake near Sichuan. Yes, that one was in fact not attributable to natural tectonic activities, but rather to causes that arose from the dammed-up water masses of the Ziping Pu Dam, which caused such a pressure on the underground that it triggered the large and the subsequent earthquakes. A fact that has already occurred worldwide for other reservoirs and will continue to occur. Then, starting on the 27th of December, there will again be heavy military machinations by Israel against the Palestinians, resulting in hundreds of deaths to be mourned.
Israeli airstrikes against Gaza. Der Landbote Winterthur Monday, the 29th of December 2008. The attack had been planned for 6 months. Tages Anzeiger Zurich, Monday the 29th of December 2008.
However, this is not particularly unusual, because in those territories there are very many human beings stirred up by irresponsible leaders in tremendous hatred, and namely both amongst the Palestinians and among the Israelis. Hence, malicious military incidents will occur again and again.
Hamas smuggled new missiles through tunnel system. Tages Anzeiger Zurich, Monday, the 29th of December 2008.
The reason for the new conflict is again, as so often, not only with the Palestinians, that is to say, with the criminal and fanatical Hamas organization, which is truthfully a terrorist organization and which orders the launching of hundreds of rockets against Israel, but also with the Israelis, who block the Gaza Strip and thereby create hardship and misery. This leads to Hamas by its fanatical followers firing large numbers of explosive missiles against Israel, which in turn leads to major destructive counterattacks by the Israeli Air Force and ultimately to a ground offensive in the Gaza Strip by the Israelis, who are much better equipped when it comes to military gear. In this process, hundreds of human beings will die, with many of them civilians, women, children, and men. What Israel is doing, however, is just as criminal and characterized by hateful fanaticism by the criminal rulers and their followers, and by the applause of the USA, as is the case with the responsible persons and followers of the Hamas organization. Both sides are thus completely conscienceless, murderous, and without any respect for the life. Sadly, those who suffer are, as usual, all those of the civilian population who remain free from all hatred and who do not want war, but real peace, or at least a peaceful coexistence with all human beings. Indeed, also with those who are considered enemies and fought against by the criminal and hateful fanatics of the governments and of the terrorist organizations. The whole thing that will take place in the Gaza Strip as a result of Israel's acts of war will then be that brutal, malicious, murderous, committing war crimes and contemptuous of human life, that worldwide tirades of hatred will break out against Israel and its practices, whereby the Islamic world in particular will get into a rage. Hence, Israel will worldwide escalate the hatred against itself to great heights, whereby also the Israeli people in general will be cursed and compared with the Nazi machinations. The Israeli warmongers in government and among the people are doing exactly the opposite of what they should be doing, namely killing and destroying, instead of finally bidding peace a hand with all the trimmings. Regrettably, in Israel, as in many other countries of the earth, only a tiny 25 to 30% of the population have advanced that far in their intelligence that they want peace and refrain from hatred and revenge, because they really strive to offer their fulfillment of duty to the being human in the real and true sense.
Thus those people who really want peace, 25 to 30%, as you say, are unfortunately always in the minority and are unable to accomplish anything against the criminal ones greedy for might, and the hatred they stir up among those with low intelligence among the people against entire peoples, or against those of other religions, as well as against those who think differently in a good way. This is no different for us in Switzerland, with its supposedly direct democracy, because here too the government and the people are swarming with human beings who have fallen prey to the hate mentality, revengeful mentality and might behavior, whereby righteous and justly thinking individuals in the people know this, but must keep their mouths shut and are not allowed to call the persons concerned by their names, because this is punishable, and the truth must not be openly spoken. But whoever dares to do it nevertheless is threatened by the storm from a court because of slander, damage to reputation, racism, and the devil only knows what else. The truth must not be publicly stated with names and the truthful descriptions and facts of what these people really are with regard to their character and their machinations. I personally experienced this when I publicly denounced the sect guru known to you and did some straight talking about his deeds and his craft. And regarding our direct democracy in Switzerland, one wonders anyway where it is supposed to be, because there were things going on that had nothing to do with democracy at all. One only has to think of the slimy machinations of agreements among certain Swiss parties, by which Federal Councillor Blocher was dumped in a dirty way. But these people are that conscienceless and unscrupulous when it comes to their might that they would even sell their own mother to the devil if they could thereby gain an advantage in terms of their opinion, their profit, and their might.
As you always say, you hit the nail on its head. Federal Councillor Blocher used to be a very good man in his office, of the kind that one will hardly be able to find a second person with the same abilities and the same dedication. It is extremely regrettable what happened to him, because he was truthfully the only one, along with Federal Councillor Merz, who was on the right path, which, however, was destroyed for him by the irrationality, as well as by jealousy and the hypocritical well-manneredness and honorableness of politically and humanly incapable persons who thought themselves to be blameless and righteous.
Your speech is entirely consistent with my thinking. Because Christoph Blocher has been voted out of office by the irrationality of the simple-minded ones in a sneaky way unprecedented in Switzerland, the driving power for the preservation of the direct democracy and neutrality of Switzerland has been lost. Hence, it can be muddled on by those who work on the destruction of neutrality, the proverbial freedom, independence, as well as the abolition of the direct democracy and flirt with the EU. All four values have already begun to waver a long time ago, and are in ever greater danger of permanently plunging into the abyss due to those who no longer stand up for their homeland, but rather live under the delusion that only an accession to the EU would be appropriate, because would be the only way for Switzerland to survive. We can only hope that the next federal councillor to be elected will again be one who stands up for Switzerland's great values, and represents and brings about the things that must be done. By the way, do you know who it will be, a man or a woman?
Welly Maurer is his name, also a man who has qualities in politics, as was the case with Federal Councillor Blocher. But how he will bring these qualities to bear will only be shown by the future, which brings him many problems and worries amidst those with whom he has to work closely, and who are already now not particularly sympathetic to his arguments, etc. He will not have an unproblematic position in his office, because apart from him and the man from Harrisau, all others are infatuated with their might, at least in political terms. The appointment of Welly Maurer to the position of federal councillor will therefore already show at the time of the election that he as a SVP man is not welcome in the federal council. Hence, he will only be elected very narrowly with just a single vote in favor, and that only because another SVP nominee rejects his own vote.
Welly Maurer, he belongs to the SVP, I know. That means the SVP will be officially represented in the federal council again. It's regrettable what happened to the other two SVP members, Schmidt and Widmer, in the Federal Council. Not everything was spotless about them either, with which I refer to their election. That was also a setup and dirty intrigue of deceitful agreements between different parties, in exactly the same way as Christoph Blocher's vote out. Those elected in this undemocratic manner lacked the stature to reject the office when they were elected. All the related machinations of the election and the voting out of Federal Councillor Blocher were deceitful and contradictory to an open democracy.
The greed for might and deceitfulness of certain human beings of Earth, especially with regard to those who are active in politics, is unfortunately boundless. These human beings are completely without morals and conscience, have a very shabby character, no feeling of honor, and know no dignity for the office they hold, but rather only their striving to exercise the might.
While this is indeed the case, It is also applicable to very many managers of banks and the industrial economy, who, through criminal machinations, obtain for themselves bonuses, rewards and compensation sums amounting to millions, who send the banks and the economy into bankruptcy, who indebt states, and who wring the hard-earned money from the little savers with lies and false promises, which they then lose due to the manager's guilt.
What I have once said about Switzerland's alleged open democracy is that it is actually not one of those, but only an inadequate partial democracy, in which the people are deprived of their right to elect their own federal councillors in an outright vote. An open democracy actually does not mean that the supreme rulers, etc., are allowed to be elected by the parliament, but rather that for these decisions, as in any other matters to be determined, only and solely the majority of the people are allowed to take them. Only if the people alone can take decisions in every respect, but not the parliament or the highest rulers, it is possible to call this an effective and open democracy. In a direct democracy, the parliament, the rulers, and the authorities, etc., are no more and no less than mere executors of the will of the people, by which alone it is determined what shall and shall not be. That is what we Plejarians and all our federates understand by an open democracy. And in such one it must also not be that the supreme rulers, a parliament or other governing bodies propagandize for any things and decisions, but rather present only elaborated plans and proposals to the people in such a way that all advantages and disadvantages of the project are mentioned to them, after which the people have to weigh everything up at their own discretion, and make the decision by an election without partiality. Anything other than what I have mentioned does not correspond to an open democracy, but only to a smaller or larger partial democracy, which in any case exhibit more or less dictatorial forms.
This is something we have already talked about many times, and it is actually the way you put it. It is only regrettable that when an attempt is made that the Federal Council or the other rulers may or are to be elected solely by the people and not by the Parliament, etc., then unfortunately there are always enough voters in the people who are against it. Lack of adeptness about what a real open democracy brings in many advantages, as well as false propaganda of the rulers and parties results in such advances being rejected and assessed as undemocratic. But this can only happen because the people, at least with regard to these things, are kept stupid and led down the garden path by all those who are against a really open democracy, but falsely proclaim the small partial democracy as being an open democracy. The might of the suggesters, who potter against a truthfully open democracy, and can thus exercise their might uninhibitedly, is unfortunately too great to be able to counter it. Exactly that leads, however, again and again to the situation that per governmental acts with the bought will of the people, wrong decisions are made, and also enormous national debts are accumulated, as well as indignation by other states and by religions, etc. is created, which can ultimately even lead to a loss of reputation of the state and even to acts of terrorism. This and all that you have just said, I have known since my early youth thanks to your father, Svath, which is also the reason why I have never joined a political party, pursue no politics, and also have never taken part in a political election, and will never do so for the rest of my life. That is also one further reason why the Association FIGU founded by me has a statutory duty to keep itself free from any political activity. Besides the fact that the information from the storage banks of Nocodemian indicate that both I and the Association FIGU have to behave politically neutral and are not to pursue politics. Therefore, no politics is allowed to be pursued in the FIGU. However, what the members, except me, do in their private life, that is their business alone. Therefore, they can according to free will turn to a party and be politically active. In the Association FIGU itself, however, they have to behave politically neutral and thus free of politics. This does not mean, however, that an opinion may not be represented with regard to things arising through the politics, because in the FIGU there is freedom of opinion. Consequently, it can also be expressed freely and openly, and namely publicly too, without politicizing thereby. as it was proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations on the 10th of December 1948. This according to Article 19, Freedom of Opinion and Information =. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Well, however, everything that we now discuss with each other malicious persons will again use against me and accuse me that I would politicize, although I do nothing else than to express what I can see, recognize, and also profoundly understand with clear rationality.
I am aware of this, because the stupidity does not die out, as you are accustomed to say, and this is also the case with those who are not able to see and evaluate the things according to the actual facts, because there is a lack of their intelligence. Only such human beings are not able to recognize the truthly facts. Therefore draw false conclusions and do not understand the difference between private and partyless, as well as politicsless freedom of opinion and speech, as you and we play-yarns practice them, because they are caught in an illogical way, in a politically suggestive assumption, and in a political activity of a kind characteristic of it, and are neither able to think, consider, and decide objectively, nor are they able to comprehend and understand the truthly facts.
It is not possible for them to separate two things from each other. With regard to the red meteor, which will endanger the Earth on the 13th of April 2029, and about which we already spoke on the 16th of September, I was asked about a few things, and would therefore like to know how big the bloke actually is. To my knowledge, the terrestrial astronomers had also already discovered it quite some time ago and call it Apophis or something. In the year 2029, it is supposed to either hit the Earth or whiz past it only very narrowly. If the latter should be the case, then a next dangerous meteor appearance would be in the year 2036, whereby then a nearing to the Earth could all the more lead to the catastrophe, if nothing is undertaken against it by the scientists, or nothing changes in relation to the trajectory of the meteor itself.
Its size is around 350 meters. The scientists know what you are saying about the great danger the red meteor poses to the Earth. And unless something results from a special influence of the outer SOL satellites, then the Earth is actually threatened by a catastrophe. In order to avoid this, however, the terrestrial scientists are also urged to undertake every conceivable possibility to push the meteor permanently out of its orbit.
To my knowledge, various models exist for this purpose, but the scientists cannot reach an agreement on this. You are saying that the journeyman should be pushed out of its orbit, wherefrom I gather that blowing up is out of the question. Therefore, only a repulsion principle could be applied, like for example an enormously strong nuclear repulsion aggregate, solar sail principles or atomic explosions in the vicinity of the meteor.
Whereby particularly close to the meteor, atomic explosions should be considered, because these are very efficient and produce a strong drifting effect with such objects. However, the explosions must not take place too close to the meteor in order to avoid a breakup by which an even greater danger would arise. However, such an undertaking must already be carried out early, and not only then, when the real danger starts to threaten, because otherwise a success can hardly still be given. This means that already today work would have to be done in this direction.
And what about big repulsion aggregates and solar sail principles?
Those are also possibilities. However, they are much more difficult to carry out and questionable in their necessary effectiveness, and moreover, they are not particularly recommendable with regard to their efficiency, because meteors are unstable with regard to a steady own position, but rather exhibit an own rotation, by which the attachment of effective repulsion aggregates and solar sails, etc., is as good as rendered impossible.
Thus, these things must still be thoroughly thought through by the scientists.
That is in fact the case, but time for that presses.
May your words be in the scientist's ear. However, let us now speak of something else. Do you still have other predictions?
Australia. Many deaths due to heat wave. Zürcher Landzeitung. Ooster Monday, the 2nd of February 2009. Sydney numerous deaths due to heat. Zürcher Landzeitung. Ooster Saturday, the 31st of January 2009. Costa Rica severest earthquake in 150 years. More than 70 fatalities feared. Zürcher Landzeitung. Ooster, Monday, the 12th of January 2009.
A few things are still open, such as, for example, that in the first days of January 2009, a seaquake of the magnitude 7.8 will be off West Guinea, and shortly thereafter, a second one of somewhat lesser magnitude. An earthquake of magnitude 4.2 will also occur in the east of Switzerland, but this will have no consequences and remain within the normal range. Another earthquake will occur in Costa Rica, namely at the Poás volcano, with a magnitude of 6.1. Towards the middle and end of January, Australia will be hit by a major heat wave of up to 48 degrees Celsius, whereby once again large forest fires and severe destructions will be caused, and many deaths will have to be mourned.
Australia, the hottest place on the planet. Tages-Anzeiger Zurich, Saturday, the 7th of February 2009.
I have no further predictions to offer.
That is all right, my friend. You are indeed very well versed in the history of the Earth, and that is exactly what I have a question about. The dinosaurs were by no means the first life forms, but what preceded them? How did life develop?
The first life, as you know, did not develop in the water, but in the sandy shores of the waters.
Submerged in the Sea of Flames. Tages-Anzeiger Zurich, Monday, the 9th of February 2009.
These first life forms were the ones that developed further in the water and became the first swimming aquatic life forms, and in the course of a very long time, also ultimately developed feet in the water. In the course of millions of years, these life forms changed and became amphibians, from which finally the actual land life forms developed from different genera and species. Their actual distant descendants in turn developed into the forms of the so-called Philodontia, as they are designated by the terrestrial researchers. The Philodontia life forms populated the planet as actual predecessors of all dinosaurs.
Feverish search for the arsonist begins. The Landbot Winterthur, Wednesday, the 11th of February 2009.
Aha. That again helps me a little farther in my understanding of the corresponding history of the Earth. Thank you.
Well, Edward, my friend, it is time for me again because there are still urgent works that apply to me. I will be back on the 3rd of February. Farewell.
Take care, Ptah. You too farewell and have a good time.